The public sector affects every aspect of life in the UK. This podcast will give you exclusive news, interviews, and insights from the people responsible for building and shaping the country's future. In each episode, we'll be joined by key figures in the public sector, covering everything from the environment to the economy. Hello and welcome to Public Sector Voices. I'm Chris Cromer, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Managing Director and Founder of Trueman Change, Lucy Trueman. Hello Lucy, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, thanks. So it's great to have you along today. So first things first, can you tell me a bit about Trueman Change and how it came about?
Yeah, of course. So my earlier career was in the public sector. So I worked in local government for a number of years and seemed to, not on purpose, but end up in a series of roles where they were kind of short, sharp, temporary. There's a crisis, we need to fix it. So I never really fell into the business as usual kind of roles, and then left and went self-employed initially just to work in change management and transformation in the public sector. And it's been a passion of mine really for a number of years, because I just feel like the public sector, especially local government, is so varied in what it does and makes such a difference in what it does and faces really unique challenges. The variety in local government is the thing that really fascinates me. You know, there's so few organisations that will do everything from, you know, looking after vulnerable children and adults through to mending potholes and emptying bins, and, you know, they employ people from such a wide range of professions. So the complexity around work in the public sector is something that really fascinates me. And then over the years of being self-employed, just ended up taking on a bit too much work and ended up taking on a couple of people. So as we are now, there's 10 of us at the moment, and we work with a range of clients around the country, helping them to do change and transformation well. And for me, the thing that's happened in the last 2 years that's really, again, reignited my passion in the topic is the impact of COVID, because, you know, we've had this period where change has had to happen at a pace never seen before in the sector. So yeah, that's my current thing that I'm hugely curious about. What can we take from this terrible, tragic, difficult 2 years and learn how to do change in a completely different way?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's been a challenging 2 years, as you've alluded to. How do you think the public sector has dealt with that change, this unprecedented change since the pandemic?
So I think, I mean, it will be obviously mixed. It will be mixed, and organisations will have been in different states of readiness to handle something like a pandemic. For me personally, the start of the pandemic was really tough. So I lost my dad to COVID. So he actually died on the 3rd of April. So he became ill at the end of March, and we only went into lockdown at the end of March. So it was right at the time where it all felt extremely surreal for everybody. You know, the world is suddenly grinding to a halt. And so it was a very, very difficult time. And I think there was a lot of fear around at the very start of the pandemic. But I think what was interesting is that the crisis, it unblocked a lot of things in the public sector. So a lot of the things that traditionally slow change down, you know, the stereotypical thing is the bureaucracy. Actually, a lot of that went out of the window. And the other thing that I think was so valuable was the genuine, meaningful collaboration, both between leaders and the workforce and between organisations. So, you know, the ability for partnerships to form and really make change happen at pace was just phenomenal. And in many ways, a lot of the changes that happened weren't actually new things. They weren't things the pandemic was new. But, you know, the issue of getting people to be able to work from home, that's something we've been talking about for years. The issue of working better and closer with communities is something that we've all been talking about for years. So there was a massive acceleration and a way of doing change that was not the traditional change management, project management methodology. So nobody got the Prince 2 book out when they had to set up food banks. So there was just a completely different approach. And I find that, and I don't know if it's part of therapy because I lost my dad and I feel like the need to find something positive out of the pandemic, but I just feel that there is huge learning to be had there about how to do change after the pandemic in a very different way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, sorry to hear about your loss. You were talking about, new things were put in place. The rule book was effectively thrown out the window, and we see that with things like furlough and even getting the vaccine. Things were done that would normally have taken years, but the public sector pulled together, worked as one team, and really done some very innovative things in a short period of time.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
And how do you think the public sector could be better at change management? Because obviously they've had a lot of experience over the 2 years, but as things sort of return to normal now, how do you think they can do that better?
So I think some of the things we've touched on already, I think the focus on people rather than a process was massive. So again, that's that losing the bureaucracy. So instead of trying to force a change program into a set of methodology or a set of tools, actually what happened was people thought, right, who do we need around the table to help solve this problem, and how do we work better with those people? So I think that was massive. We touched on the collaboration. That was a big theme for us. So we've been researching this now for the last kind of 18 months, speaking to organizations, finding out what were those key success factors. Collaboration was huge. So whether that was collaboration between public sector organizations, that previously there was some collaboration, but it wasn't, it never really got off the ground, or whether it was with the community, but also treating staff as being part of the solution. Nobody knew the answer. So by having that authenticity to say, we don't know the answer to this change, we don't know what's coming next, but this is what we need to do now. How can we do it? Let's all get our heads together. There was a real sense of that often in change programs prior to the pandemic, there's a small number of people that set the vision and they hold that very tightly in a room, and then it is cascaded upon everybody. There's not that same engagement. So I think that was huge. I think the ability to just take action and empower people and just try things. We're traditionally a bit risk averse, and we can't take all of that forward because there's a reason that we have to be risk averse. It's a very heavily regulated sector, but I think there's definitely something around that. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting, because this is traditional change management, is that very clear sense of purpose. And we always talk about this in change management, and some people refer to it as a case for change or as the burning platform, but whatever it is, almost every change management methodology has at the start of it getting that clarity around and that sense of purpose as to why you're making that change. The difference I saw there was that the sense of purpose was quite emotive. So it was something that we all genuinely cared about, but also there was a courage around clarity that you often don't see. So probably the best example for that is when we talk about remote working. So for years, organizations said we want a flexible, agile workforce, which didn't really mean anything to anybody or could be interpreted 100 different ways. In the pandemic, we said everybody has to be able to work from home by Monday. So that courage and that clarity of every decision we make has to be getting us to that solution made the change happen much quicker. And I think that's a massive learning. And it's really tough to do that in local government and in the public sector, because it's tough to nail your colours to the mast to that extent, because what they deliver is so complex that often what we do is water the purpose down. So we come up with slogans like, everyone matters, or a place where people are happy and healthy. But I think we lose something there. We lose something by making it so catch-all. And there's something about that power of directness that I think enable change to happen very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people in the public sector are wanting change. There's a lot of talk over a 4-day working week. There's hybrid work, and these things have been implemented, like working from home. But do you think that workers in the public sector will continue to advocate for change and a better work-life balance?
Oh God, I hope so. I really hope so. Part of what's driving me to pull all of this research together, so I've been working on a book which pulls all of this together, and we've built a methodology and something called a change accelerator program, which is how we would, if we were going to take all this knowledge based on how it happened in the pandemic into an organization to make them better at change, how would we do it? And one of the things that really drives me with that is we can't go back to how it was before, because actually people stepped up. Like, people were working really hard with kids crawling around the feet, animals walking all over the desk. When it came to, we've really got to step up and continue to deliver public services above and beyond what we have done previously. It put huge pressure on the workforce to deliver and keep people safe during the pandemic, and people in the main absolutely stepped up to that. You can't then turn around to those same people and say, well, now it's after the pandemic, so actually it's okay for us to spend 3 years delivering a change program that costs a load of money. We pay a fortune in consultants. It takes 3 years, and at the end of it, nothing's really any different. We can't do that. And, nationally, probably internationally, there is this great resignation now where people are just saying, I'm not going back to that old world where I felt disempowered, I felt unable to make change happen, I felt like I didn't have any autonomy, and my work-life balance was a mess. People are not prepared to work like that anymore. So yeah, in answer to your question, I really hope that both individuals and organisations are taking this opportunity to rethink what that relationship looks like and what their work life looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is advantages to things like working from home. When you look at the climate emergency, if more people are working from home, they won't have to drive into work, things like that. It will save money for the public sector as well, not having to open up so many offices, use the same amount of electricity, things like that. So there is advantages for the workers, but also for the public sector organisations themselves.
Yeah, and it isn't for everybody. It's not for all jobs. I remember speaking to somebody quite early on as part of our research of what's happening, who worked in social care, that was saying actually, even though they were trialing doing a lot of the work remotely, actually that physical distance between the office and the home was really, really beneficial for social workers, particularly younger with less experience social workers that are having conversations about really horrendous, difficult things while their children is in the house with them. There are certain circumstances where it doesn't work, and certainly in my team we do some face-to-face stuff. We get together every sort of 6 to 12 weeks to kind of reassess where we are and socialize. So I'm not at all saying it's one rule for everybody, but I think the flexibility that people showed during the pandemic, as organisations, we need to keep showing that we can be flexible too and react in the way that works for everybody rather than just having fixed rules.
Absolutely. And can you tell me how Trueman Change can help public sector organisations going through a period of transition and development?
So we help in lots of different ways. My favourite way to help, my favourite thing to do is something that we do called culture mapping, which is where almost all organisations have tried to do a change programme that's not worked out. Everybody I speak to has got a horror story about a change programme that didn't work. And often it's the unseen aspects of culture that makes change feel like it's really just you stuck wading through treacle. So we do something where we go into organisations and we run workshops with a range of people to really get to grips with what is stopping this change from happening. Is it systems and processes? Is it behaviour? Is it just kind of symbols and rituals and regular things that happen that nobody questions anymore? So that's certainly one of my favourite ways. The methodology that we've launched, which is the Change Accelerator programme, includes that, but also does a range of other things like setting that purpose and that clarity, building the right level of structure around change. So I know I did DIS Prince 2 earlier in this conversation, but actually you need some structure, you need some project management structure, but just not to get carried away with it. And we also we do the sort of extra boots on the ground kind of role where people are clear on what they want and they know what the culture is, but they just don't have the capacity to drive the change in-house. A lot of people have lost good project and change managers over the years with austerity, so we do provide that service as well. We've recently launched a free tool on our website, which I'm very proud of. It took a lot of work to get it right, but it is basically like a short questionnaire. It's 12 questions which people can answer. It only takes 5 minutes to do, and what that does is enables you to self-assess your organisation against some of these things that we've learned during the pandemic of what makes change happen well. and yeah, that will kick out a PDF report and say, this is, you're strong in this area, you're weak in this area. But that's a really nice intro to what your organisation might need. But although we do certain packages, we pride ourselves in everything being very tailor-made, because every organisation is different. And that's why I love doing the culture mapping, because what that does is it enables you to really get to the root of what is it in that organisation that's slowing things down, because it does vary. And so we'll never be a sort of consultancy that drops certain things on over and over again, because it's about understanding where people are and the history, that the history of change in an organisation can make a huge difference. And if there's been a series of failed change programmes, people don't bother resisting them, because they know if they just stick their head in the sand, it won't happen anyway. So there's lots to unpick and understand. But I do come back to all the time, it can't go back to how it was. And actually, we did change really well during the pandemic. People were working really hard and yet very engaged, very passionate. And I had people saying to me, I feel like I've finally, after 30 years of working in the public sector, I'm finally doing what I came here to do, which is help people. So there was a real reigniting of passion to serve communities, and I just think it would be criminal to lose that now at this stage.
Absolutely. And do you think getting rid of bureaucracy did give a freedom to workers, as you said, to help people, because that was the reason they got into the public sector?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of that. I think it was authentic leadership, so leaders actually giving away a bit of control and saying, we don't know what the answers is, so let's all just come together and try and figure this out together. I think it was that clarity. When you have that clarity and this is exactly what we have to achieve, that empowers people to make decisions, because they know where they're trying to get to. And I do think, there is the obvious thing that there wasn't an option. There was not an option. People had to work from home. People had to make sure that those that were shielding could get access to food and medicine. It was a crisis. And I think it was a crisis which, as I said earlier, I lost my dad. There's been hundreds of thousands of people that have lost somebody, but also it's affected everybody. Whether you lost somebody or not, people have been worried about the family's health, people have been worried about money. It did impact everybody. So I do think that we can't underestimate that. But I think it would be a shame to not take any of the learning and just be like, well, it was a very unusual situation, so now let's carry on like we were before. I think there's a middle ground, isn't there, of what can we take forward that's more positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is about public sector organisations, they're funded by the taxpayer, so they really do have to get change right, because if not, then that won't look good to the public. So they really want to make change happen, get it done right, and really implement changes that will benefit the wider public. And yes, so I was doing a bit of research into Trueman change, and one thing I found very interesting was the Trueman change way wheel. Can you tell me a bit more about that and how it works?
Yeah, so the wheel was really just the summary of what our findings were from the research about how to do change differently post-COVID. So, and a lot of it we've talked about in this podcast. So the first item is that sense of purpose, which as we said, there was that real emotional connection to it. It was something that everybody related to. The second item is that sense of clarity, where people really knew what it was that they needed to deliver. I actually think that might be the most powerful one, to be honest. There's then a whole thing around being human, and that's a little bit around the bureaucracy and focusing on actual people. But again, it's that authenticity, and I think something magic happened where when we were in the depths of crisis, leaders looked around at their people to identify who have we got, who will help with this, who will know. And it became much less about job titles or seniority and much more about understanding individual strengths. And also there was a huge increase in the conversations around mental health. There was an acceptance that people would be struggling, so there was more talk about that. Whereas prior to the pandemic, when we go through a change programme, a lot of organisations sort of dismiss the resistance and dismiss the emotional impact on the workforce. So yeah, there was something much more human about it all, which is why that's a segment on the wheel. Collaboration, we've already talked a lot about. There was huge increase in collaboration, and I think particularly in local government, where you focused on a small local area and you've got partners to work with, it's incredible what we can do when we work together better with others. So there was lots of learning there. Taking action is a section on the wheel. That is basically, again, that bureaucracy. It's about what can we do? How do we create that culture and that ability for people to just take action and not procrastinate, not worry about going through lengthy processes. And so that was obviously huge during COVID. And then the last part of the wheel is really about resilience, because it's that sense of keep going. And what I saw before the pandemic is a lot of change programs kick off, and then a year later they fizzled out into nothing. And that was not an option. So there's something to learn there about not deviating and making sure that you keep going and have that resilience as a leader. So yeah, they're the 6 components of our wheel, which, as I said, we've built then a process around that as to how you can take that learning into an organisation now.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And can you give me specific examples of how Trueman Change have successfully initiated change in the public sector? I saw some examples on your website, for example, project delivery for Tamworth Borough Council.
Yes, so that's a piece of work where, again, very much in that post-COVID space, where it is around building a transformation programme. So what is the learning from COVID specific to that organisation? And that covers things like how they do their customers front-end services, where they are based. There's a real host of council-wide transformation work there, and we've helped them to build that programme of work, and we've helped them to deliver it by, again, it's that boots on the ground kind of thing, that they just didn't have the capacity and skill in-house to set up a programme and run it. But we've done lots of other work as well. So we do some evaluation work. There's been an increase in that since COVID, actually, where we're helping organisations to look at what they've learned. So we did a piece of work up north with a northern-based council where it was basically looking at their COVID response and how they'd set up partnerships and what's next for that particular body. So they'd set up a whole community network. So what's next for that? They can't just let that dissipate, and actually we can keep those relationships going. So we've helped them by setting up partnership principles and keeping that work ongoing. And yeah, I've done some work looking at the sort of general approach to change and that culture mapping with a London borough, where it's been, okay, let's understand what stops us from making change happen, and how can we speed things up and make things much more innovative and much more agile on a change management side.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like each of your programs looks at the organisation as an individual rather than a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, that's really important to me, and I think that probably comes from my background as being in the public sector rather than a background in consultancy. I do always joke that I'm running a consultancy having never worked in one, and I really am making it up as I go along. And I do tend to recruit people from the public sector as well. So I think we have that very in-depth understanding that every organisation is different. And one of the things I loved about being an interim manager when I was just on my own and working with different organisations was that lovely period of time you have at the start of a contract where you're really just getting to know an entirely new organisation. And in local government, it's not just the organisation, it's the place itself. So, some areas, when I work in council in London, then their priorities and what matters to them is entirely different to when I work with somewhere like Tamworth, because the geographical area is completely different and the communities are very different. So that variety is what gives me joy, really. So yeah, I would never want to create the sort of consultancy where we were just recreating the same piece of work over and over again, because there's not much point being a consultant if you're doing that. I think that takes all the fun away from it, to be honest.
Absolutely. And is there anything else you would like to add?
My plea really for anybody listening is to think about how you did change during the pandemic and what is not replicable, what was a bad idea, what went wrong, but also what went really well. Because, we do have to, and as a change management community, we really have to think about the fact that when change needed to happen, and it needed to happen very quickly, the traditional approaches weren't the ones that we took. So let's take this opportunity in memory of all the people that we've lost to bring something good to this. And I feel like, not just the sadness of the loss, but the happiness of the people that have said things like, I'm finally helping people, which is what I came into the sector to do. We can't let that go. That's such a tragic thing to just let dissipate. So yeah, think about change, think about how you did it when you needed to do it really quickly, and take those lessons forward. I think that's my mission at the moment, is to carry that message and get everybody doing that.
Absolutely, that sounds really good and really inspiring. Thank you for joining us today, Lucy. I really enjoyed that and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed today's podcast and discussions, don't forget to like and subscribe, or give us a rating on whatever streaming service you're using. Thanks for listening. See you next time.